Okay, a very warm welcome to today's special guest webinar from TMSDI, Performance and Data, What is the Link? And we're going to be very shortly introducing Krystyna. I can see most of you can see her here. Hi, welcome, Krystyna. Hi.
Hi, great to be here.
And I think I've just popped up as well on the screen. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who are just joining, if you've never been to one of our webinars before or ever joined a WebEx session, hopefully everything's been self-explanatory. If you're just connecting and you're having any troubles, please send a message to the technical support login that you can see in the panelist list. And in the meantime, feel free to just click on call using computer or call using your phone, and you'll be able to connect to the audio. In the meantime, we have got a few opportunities to hear your voice in today's session. And of course, we can do that at intervals, but also just throughout the session. So if you have any comments, questions, we will be able to take those as we go through. We do have a little time at the end for any specific questions and Krystyna's and my thoughts on those. Equally, if you want to tweet us at TMSDI, get involved in the conversation that way too. All right, so before we get started, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I think looking at most of you who are joining, and goodness me, we do have a very wide-ranging set of participants on today's call. People from, just looking down here, we can see joining from Switzerland. Hello, Adrian. France, Lebanon, Ireland, Scotland, France, again, South Africa, Norway, Mumbai, and even Nigeria, as well as all over the UK. So a very warm welcome to a wonderfully international audience. So my name is Mark. I'm the Managing Director here at TMSDI. My background is in the world of psychology, and I've been here now for the last 15 years, predominantly working with our learning and development team, running our accreditation programs, as well as our webinars as well. And that's, I was actually looking back in our history, that's where Krystyna and I first met. We met back in Leeds about over 10 years ago.
Is it that long, Mark?
I think it may have been 12.
Wow, yes, that is a long time, isn't it?
It's taken me all of those 12 years to grow this beard as well. with a great resource called which worked really nicely for helping conversations with teams, and we've stayed in touch ever since.
We have.
So I'm going to switch off my video now and hand over Krystyna. So Krystyna is actually a member of the TMSDI International Network. She completed her training as a practitioner back in 2015, and many of you will, I'm sure, have come across her. She's a real veteran of various webinars and virtual learning scenarios, as well as the idea of accelerated learning. I very often find her in my podcast feed. She's done a great series of podcasts with the Trainer Tools podcast around accelerated learning, which I can highly recommend, and has recently authored a new book, which is called How Not to Waste Money on Training, which we can highly recommend.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I don't know whether I like the use of the word veteran though, because that makes me sound. I am getting old, but it makes me sound even older. But never mind. We will. I'll get over myself in terms of worrying about what those words mean and how many years. So welcome everybody, and thanks to Mark for inviting me onto this webinar. And I'm just trying to move. Oh yes, here we go. Let me just tell you a very, very small amount about myself, and then I will switch the video off because it tends to distract me. So I, years and years ago, more years than I care to remember, I was a chemical engineer and fuel technologist. That's what I studied at university. And I spent 6 years as an engineer before moving into the field of IT training. I was always a maths geek, but the training sort of sparked off an interest in me, and it was really evident that what I loved to do was help people to develop. And so I moved into the field of soft skills training, and I now have got my own small consultancy here in Leeds and love what we do. I've been in learning development for over 30 years. And a while back, I was heard saying to somebody that I'm not the sort of person who writes articles or books. And maybe that's the subject of another webinar about imposter syndrome. Here I am. I've written lots of articles and books as well, and I am definitely still a maths geek as well. So this is about looking at the link between performance and data. And it's great to be doing this in conjunction with TMSDI, a fabulous company up in Yorkshire as well. And as again, the links between myself and Mark, we've known each other for quite a while. And so it's great to be working with Mark today. So what's this all about today? Well, oh, let me just go back one. So what's it all about? We're going to be being clear about qualitative and quantitative data. We're going to be looking at how you select methods for collecting data. So regardless of whether you are in L&D or HR, and actually as we're speaking, it would be useful for me to know which field you're actually in, where you've come from, because some of the people may be from learning development, some people may be from HR, and I don't know where everybody else might be from. So in the chat box, as I'm just doing this introduction, if you can start typing in saying what field are you in at the moment. So we're also going to be looking at finding the story in the data using a simple example. So Imogen's just saying she can't hear any sound. So I'm presuming that people can hear me. So we've already got somebody saying that they're learning and development. So I'm assuming that people can hear me because nobody said otherwise.
Hi there, Chris. Yeah, I think there's a few people just having a couple of audio difficulties. If you wanted to send a message to the technical support line, we'll do our best to get those resolved for you guys.
That's the best thing to do. So some of you very kindly responded to the survey that I sent out. And these are the sorts of things that you can see from this graph that you are really, really interested in. And it's great because we will be covering these things. So the most popular thing was demonstrating the link between data and performance. Then the second most popular was finding the story and the data. And then the final thing, the third most popular, was setting clear outcomes. And then the fourth was actually presenting the data in an easy and accessible way as well. So I will be covering all of those, but if people have got any questions as we go along, I'm happy to take those. Mark's going to be looking out in the chat box to be able to see what the questions are if I miss anywhere. And somebody's asking, is the webinar recorded? Are we recording this, Mark?
It is indeed. It will be ready in a day or so to view the recording.
So it is being recorded as well. So those people who don't manage to get onto the webinar, we can share that with you. To start off with, I am curious to know where you are on this scale. I'm going to start off by gathering some data myself, and I'm really keen to know where you are on this scale, whether it's on the phobic end, where it comes to data collection and analysis, or whether it's on the fanatical end. I would definitely put myself on a 5, a score of 5. But what I'm wanting you to do is, in a moment, Mark is going to give you control of your annotation tool. So could you do that just now, Mark?
No problem at all. I think what we'll end up doing in the end is if people can into the chat box, we will annotate it as we go along.
Right, okay, we can do that. Brilliant. So I am really keen to know where you are on this scale. Are you phobic, extremely phobic, and consider yourself a number 1? Or are you perhaps just a little bit phobic and maybe moving on to a score of 2? Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle between phobic and fanatic as well. Or maybe you are quite keen on data and data analysis, and maybe you could score yourself a 4. Or maybe you are a fanatic like myself, and you could score yourself a number 5. So we've got a couple of 4s arriving there.
Okay, here we go. We've got quite a few arriving here. I think actually quite a few in the middle as well.
Okay, well, that's what we want to see. So we'd like to be able to see where you are at the moment, and then we're going to where you are at the end as well. Can annotate, please do, or if not, can you please just add in the chat box? So find the chat box, which will be in the area, I think it's to the right of the main screen, it should be.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, and I'm going to switch off my screen just now, my video just now. Stop that. So we've got a lot of 3s and 4s, which is great. For any more, we've got any more coming up, Mark?
I'm going to add mine in. I'm a huge data geek, so absolutely, I'm going to go in.
Mine's there.
At the top end.
That's mine. The green one's mine, so I'm definitely at the top end, definitely there. Yes. So just give you 10 seconds finally to type in another number. We then move on. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. I'm going to take a picture of that slide actually, Mark, whilst we're waiting.
Sure.
I'm going to move on now to the next one. Whilst I'm in annotation mode, I can't move on. So maybe if you can, go, that's it. Excellent. So my next question to you is, why bother collecting or analysing data? So there are lots of reasons why we should collect or analyse data, but I want to hear from you. So again, using the chat box, if you can actually start writing in what you feel are the reasons that we should collect or analyse data. What are your thoughts, Mark, while we're waiting for people to start typing in?
I think it's an interesting word, isn't it, data? I think people automatically look at that phrase and especially when it's compared with the word analyzing, and assume that it has to be entirely numerical. And of course, there are many different forms of data, and that we can interpret in different ways.
Yes. Talk about that in a moment. I can't see anything coming up in the chat as yet, so we are waiting for people to type something in. If you were hoping to sit back and relax today, then I am going to be working people quite hard. So we've already got James, and he said so that we can make objective decisions. So in the chat as well, you can choose who you actually direct the chat at, and if you can do it to all the attendees, that would be great, because I think some of you maybe have been directing the chat to Mark. So that we can make objective decisions, absolutely, so we can make decisions as well. Anybody else got any other thoughts?
Yeah, so we have some other input here from Bernice. Bernice says to turn it into evidence, information.
Absolutely. So evidence that you are meeting a mark, whether you have done what you said you're going to do, and so on. Fantastic. Yes. And then we've got Phil. Hello, Phil. In order to influence and add credibility. Yes, I think that's a really, really important part. The credibility thing key as well. So fantastic. Yeah.
A few others here, Chris, coming in. So we have customer satisfaction, so a really good example of data there from Laura. From Clint, be more evidence-based in your practice and working with trends and forecasting.
Absolutely.
And then James has said, as a practitioner of L&D, we need feedback, so we need to collect data to get this. I like this from Liz as well. Data is knowledge, and knowledge is power. Smiley face.
I like that as well. And we've got from Rebecca, to measure movement and impact. Yeah. So keep typing in those. And I'm just going to progress the slides on to the next one to have a look at some of the answers that I have sort of considered. And we've covered some of these. So credibility was mentioned already. Just to see if we're on track, you know, and Rebecca, you mentioned movement and impact. So are we actually heading in the right direction? What value has been brought by your solution? So that is covered by the impact bit as well. Also, I would suggest the transition from just being a provider to a performance enhancer. So years ago, I think people in HR and L&D as well were just seen as being service providers, and they would dole out either processes or training or whatever. Whereas now it's much more about how can we improve performance and what can we do. And it's avoiding that sheep dip approach. So it's personalizing as well, and that's a hot topic as well in the L&D world, which is all about personalization of learning. Now I want to share with you another graph, and I've just clicked too many times. This was collected, the data from this was collected from a webinar I did earlier in the year from the Learning and Skills group, and there were over 100 people there, and I asked them what the benefits were of collecting data. See that the top answers fit in with what you were actually saying. Well, one of them is improve experience, so that fits in with the customer feedback. So what's the customer actually experiencing, and how is that coming out? And then understanding the effects, so looking at the value, what is it that we've actually done, what's the impact? So pretty much the reasons are there from yourselves, and also are in this graph as well. So just going back a step, and my engineering brain, some of you may be thinking about data, some of you may be thinking a little bit at the thought of data, some of you may be quite comfortable with it. As an engineer, I would never have embarked on any project without knowing exactly what was happening at the other end. But people might think that there's no room for gut instinct when you start using data, and you'd be quite wrong if that's your assumption. So let me give you an example. I used to work for a company that made wind turbines, and the company that made the wind turbines used to send me out to check to see if there were sites that were suitable for siting a wind turbine. So I would look at a map, and then the next step would be to put a mast on it, collect some data. Now I got quite good at this siting of wind turbines, so good that I could look at a map and I could think, well, actually that would be a really good spot for a wind turbine. But I never would have been brave enough or foolish enough to actually site a wind turbine without going out site to have a look at it, so collect more data. Neither would I have been foolish enough to have sited a wind turbine without collecting some data to actually, in effect, sort of confirm that this is a good spot, it's a windy spot. Going out to site, I might notice there's a building that's been erected since the map was done. There might be some trees that have grown, and that might cause turbulence. And so the gut instinct was really, really useful for me to narrow down where on this map we could put a wind turbine. Actual hard data, going out to site, collecting wind measurement data would help me specifically locate where we would put that wind turbine. So I hope that's given you some confidence in knowing that you don't just, you have to make this switch to data, because gut instinct can really, really save you time and save you a lot of analysis as well. So rather than being inundated with data and collecting loads and loads, you can actually target where you start collecting data. If you've got a hunch, or somebody else has got a hunch as to where things are going wrong. Now, Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. And as I said to you, as an engineer, I wouldn't have ever embarked on a project exactly what I wanted to get out of the other end. What I think is equally important is that context is everything, that you can't design anything in a vacuum. So that is really key. And one of the examples that we'll be looking at, we'll be able to see how context plays a really, really important part in what we do when we collect data. So what stops us from collecting data? So again, I want you to use the chat facility and start typing in what you think stops us from collecting and analysing data. So again, Mark, what are your thoughts while we're waiting for people to start typing? What do you think stops us?
Well, it's interesting. I was actually having a conversation earlier this week with someone who I know is on the webinar today, James, and we had a conversation about fear and how, if we're honest about things, fear drives a lot of our behaviour in the workplace.
Yes.
So I think one of the key features of what stops people collecting data is fear, and that fear could be directed around, well, are we fearful of what the data is going to tell us? Is it going to challenge our values, our views? Or is it going to give us a strong obligation to act in a way that's different to the way that we want to act? So I think that can be a big driver, a big
Yes.
behavioural driver.
Got a question in here, and I'm going to address that actually before we start looking at what stops us. In beginning with the end in mind, you not run the risk of confirmation bias. So when I say begin with the end in mind, so have a clear picture of what it is you're trying to achieve. So for instance, it may be that you've had a rise in complaints in your customer service, on your customer service desk, and a rise in complaints. So being clear about what you're trying to achieve would be that you wanted to reduce the number of complaints from X to Y in a month. So that's what I mean by being clear. The confirmation bias comes in when you start to look at the data, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but thanks for the question as well, Clint. So what stops us? Laura has said it's considered to take too much time. Absolutely right. So some people think it's too much time it takes.
The bias, doesn't it, around very often when we're collecting data, whether it's maybe an engagement survey is a classic one in this arena, we go with what we see first. If it confirms what we would like it to see, we don't need to run any more tests, do we? We've got really good scores. Yeah. Let's not go any deeper.
No, and if there's the odd rogue one, then let's just ignore it, because it's not actually in line with what everybody else is saying. And I think we've got to remember that I think the statistic is that for every one person that complains, there's another 10 that haven't complained as well. So that's a really key thing that we need to be aware of our biases as well. So some people think it's going to take too much time, complex systems in big firms where data might not be accurate. Yeah, the data might be vast and it might not be accurate. So sometimes what you need to do is scan through the big picture. You might look at some hotspots where things are going wrong. So the data might alert you to where things might be going wrong. So the numbers, the big numbers that you collect, might be just an indicator as to where things are going wrong. And then the qualitative stuff, the opinions, might then help you to home in on what actually is going wrong. We've also got laziness. It is effortful. However, what I might suggest to you that if you are looking to improve performance, and if you align yourself with the right stakeholders, and if you're doing something going to improve performance for those stakeholders, might just do the measuring for you. That's a thought to consider. So I'm not suggesting that you collect all of the data. If we can partner with people in the business to collect the data, that is even better. And then James is saying, sometimes we don't feel the results would be in our best interest. Fear. Yes, absolutely. And also effortful to collect, often much confusion over what to collect and how. So thank you for those thoughts. And I do also have a few thoughts. I mean, sometimes, and actually I've had this in some of the webinars that I've run, people just don't know where to start. And that's what James is saying there, really. Just don't know where to begin with all of this. So I thought I'd start here, getting everybody on the same page, and forgive me if I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here. But what I thought I'd do is just show you what that link is between data and performance in a pretty graphic so that it makes it more palatable as well. So data, we start off with data. What is it? As Mark alluded, it could be just numbers. It could be opinions. It could be sentences, it could be phrases. And so data in itself is pretty useless unless we start to store it somewhere and organize it in some way, unless we create records. And that could be in a spreadsheet, it could be in a database, it could be in a learning management system, in a number of different ways, or a table. So as long as you start to organize that data, it starts to become more useful, because once it's organized, you can start analyzing it. Analyzing doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do some maths on it. A very simple way of analyzing data is to use something called the RAG approach, red, amber and green. So if I've got a spreadsheet in front of me and I want to start to do some analysis, I can highlight the figures which are way out and are really sort of way out what we would be expecting in red. I could highlight them in red. Those figures which are not quite what we're looking for, but okay-ish, but heading on towards something that might be not acceptable, I'd put in amber, which would be orange. And then those figures in the spreadsheet which are acceptable, I would put in green. And in doing that, I'm not doing any maths, but what I am doing is starting to look at where the hot spots are. So again, going back to the customer service department, if you are seeing a rise in complaints, you might do a little RAG analysis on a spreadsheet to find out where and when is this happening. So once you start that analysis, it begins to yield some information, and that information might be something like, it seems to be happening on a Wednesday afternoon, round about 4 o'clock, where we get the most complaints. Well, that's interesting information, but then you need to use that information to feed some decisions. So a decision might be that I start to dig a little bit deeper as to why that might be happening. So I might find out more information then that actually why it might be happening is because we've got a shift change at 4 o'clock. And so some of the servers that would be available aren't necessarily available, they're swapping over. And so that means that the customers aren't getting attention that they need. Now, a decision that you make following on from that you turn into an action, is that stagger maybe the shift changes, because then you get a continuance of the service. And what you're hoping to is, when you make these decisions, turn them into actions, that actually that will turn into an improvement in performance. So I hope that that has given you some idea about that link between data and performance. Are there any questions at all? Because I'm very happy to take questions, and if somebody even wanted to come on to their microphone and wanted to question, I'm happy to do that as well. So let me just move on to the next slide. We've got another slide which is going to be about qualitative and quantitative data. So again, this is something you might know, but I just wanted to get us all on the same page. So qualitative data tends to be how people feel and their opinions, and tends to be either a phrase or a sentence, or maybe a paragraph even sometimes, depending on what people are complaining about perhaps. And traditionally this was harder to analyse than, for instance, quantitative, which is all about numbers and stuff that you can measure and stuff that you can put in a spreadsheet very easily. But these days, with artificial intelligence, I do know of quite a few companies are using artificial intelligence to analyse their qualitative information as well. And in fact, SurveyMonkey, for anyone who uses that, have got a new addition, an add-on, which is a sentiment analysis. So if people have put in their decision, their opinions and their feedback into a survey, then what the sentiment analysis will do is actually find out what are actually people really saying throughout this, what are they feeling, and so that's very, very useful. So these days it's not as difficult as it used to be, and in fact in Excel, in a spreadsheet, you can do a sort on phrases and words, and it will cluster words according to sort of alphabetical order. If you've got something that highlights what a problem might be, then it will sort those out. So we've got a little activity now, and so I need you to be able to give me some feedback. Now, Mark, do you want to explain to people what they're going to do in this bit? Because they're going to either agree with me or disagree, and how do they do that?
I think we'll use the chat box again.
Can we do the chat box,
Yeah, I
or
think
can
that
we
should
do
work
it through
okay.
the feed? Or the feedback? Could we do a tick or a cross?
We can do a tick or a cross. So in your panels, you'll notice there's a little drop-down menu that's next to a little icon of a megaphone. And from that icon, you'll have a few different options. So we've got yes, no, fast, slow, applause, and laughter.
if you can use that, you can give the feedback. And I can see that Kunja has put a hand up. Is that a hand up?
Yeah, there's a hand raising icon as well, but just next to your hand raising
So if
icon
you
is the
want to do
feedback.
that, you can clear it as well. But what I want you to do is, I'm going to go through each of those examples. So either in that thing or in the chat box, I want you to either agree or disagree with me, whether these examples are right. So we've got some examples which are either qualitative or quantitative. So they're either to do with feelings or they're to do with numbers. So in the boxes, I've put in N or F. So let's look at the first one. So the number of complaints handled per hour, that is definitely a number in my opinion. So who agrees with me on that? So put your hand up or agree with me in the chat box. Is agreeing already? Anyone going in the feedback? We've got a tick. Ticks appeared. There's a couple of ticks appeared. Of agreeing here, fantastic. That was an easy one to start you off with. Okay, you can keep those just now. If you've agreed, you can keep it just now. So Laura has put her hand up. Does that mean you've got a question, Laura? Because please ask the question if you have got one in the chat box, and either direct it to everybody or you can direct it to Mark, and Mark will tell me what the question is. So that's the first one. Let's have a look at the next one, which is the positive comments on the complaints handled. I think that's to do with feelings, so that's qualitative. So if you agree with me, I want you to again either put agree, put a tick in there, or type in agree in the chat box. Disagree, I would like you to put disagree. Let's see if we've got anybody disagreeing, which I'm very happy about. Again, we've got some ticks. I would say that is definitely so. It's definitely feelings. And so this is qualitative information. So the negative comments on complaints handled. So is that to do with feelings or is it to do with numbers? So again, if you want to put in the box ticks or crosses, I've got a few people saying agree. Yes, definitely. That's definitely to do with feelings, and it's qualitative. So we're getting a few more ticks here. You can see where this is going. So then the next example is the percentage of positive comments. Now, I think that's a number. That's a quantitative. That's a quantitative bit of data. So again, we're getting more agreement there. So thank you for that. So again, if there's any time you disagree, please put disagree and we can discuss that. I'd say that most of these are washed qualitative, initially qualitative data which has been interpreted into quantitative. Would you agree? There can be issues in those transitions. So what constitutes positive exactly? Sometimes obvious, sometimes a judgment call. Absolutely. But, you know, in order to make it useful, James, we have to apply some judgment sometimes. But again, you've got to be aware of your biases as well. If all that you collected were a bunch of comments, so let's say that one person said, it's a fabulous service. Another person said, it's a good service, and then another person said I'm pleased with the service. So those three in themselves, you can group them by saying that they are positive, but yes, there is some judgment to be applied. Absolutely.
I guess, Christine, as well, it depends on the questions you ask and the range of feedback that you give here. So you could have 5 options, which was okay, good, great, excellent, amazing, which could all be interpreted positively, but on some kind of spectrum.
Yes, and I think that's a really, really good point that you're making, Mark. It depends on the questions. So the questions that you ask are really, really important, and how you ask them. And so if you ask very open-ended questions, it makes it more difficult to analyze that data. But those open-ended questions can be really, really useful for finding out what's going on. So you can look at a whole load of numbers and stats to do with where an area might be going wrong. So you might get I don't know, 500 complaints or whatever in a year, which you're trying to figure out, well, where are they all coming from? But then what you might do is just sample a small group of those people, find out what their particular issues were. So you would get the qualitative stuff then. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope that clarifies it as well. But thanks, James, for that point. Then the next one is the most common complaint. And I've said that is both a numerical thing and it's also to do with feelings as well. So again, if you disagree, put a cross or disagree. But also, if you've got some comments, whatever, I welcome those. And if you agree, keep putting a tick in or type in agree in there. Just waiting. Ticks and crosses to appear. Still got some ticks, so people are still agreeing with me. I would say, what do you think actually, Mark? Is that correct? Is that numerical and qualitative as well? Is it quantitative and qualitative at the same time?
I agree. I can see how this could be both.
Okay. Well, I would agree with you as well, because you could say that this complaint, so the most common complaint, so 40% of or 50%, were all to do with the lack of follow-up or a faulty product or whatever. So you get to know what that complaint is, but you also get to know a numerical attribute to it as well. And then the last one, and this is an easy one to finish off with, the number of times a complaint occurs per month. So I'm saying it's a number, and I hope that you all agree. Phil, you're saying probably both, but data has been processed by then, so influenced by feelings. Yes, it can be. And it's important, actually. You know, people have raised bias, and it's really important that you are aware of your own biases as well. If you are looking for something, you'll probably find it, but make sure that if, for instance, you think perhaps you might be driven by your bias, that what you're doing is getting data from different sources as well. So don't just rely on one particular source. So, you know, do that. Okay. So thanks very much for participating. James is saying, sorry, just on Mark's point, can it be worth looking at outsourcing production of survey questions in order to try and avoid confirmation bias in questions? I think it's always worth it to get some help. For instance, if you're not experienced at doing surveys, I'm quite comfortable with surveys. But if you're not used to it and you want to get data that's going to be easy for you to analyse, it may be useful for you to get some help on that. And then Phil's saying that you could have more than one analyst operating independently. Absolutely. And then if they agree from the data that they collect, you know then you've got something which is agreed upon then. Okay? Fantastic. Thank you so much for your comments. It makes it really interesting for both of us, really, doesn't it, Mark, if people are agreeing or not?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to invite you to look at the example which is at the bottom of the screen at the moment. So we've got a situation where you've got 3,000 employees in a service industry organisation, and this month sales are drastically down on predicted sales. So it's a very brief, it's a very brief scenario, not much context. What my challenge is to you now is to start thinking about, what do I need to know? What sort of data do I need to collect? Do I need to collect some qualitative data or quantitative data? What methods might I use? And what I've given you at the top of the screen are some needs analysis methods. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it is a list of different methods that you might use. And so, for instance, you know, a SWOT analysis would definitely yield qualitative information. Records checking, complaints management information would be quantitative data. But I want to know from you, what would you start with? What would you want to try and find out? You've just been given this brief. Somebody's come in and said, look, this month's sales are drastically down on predicted sales. What would you be asking? What questions would be asking? would you be collecting? Please chat in the chat box. Please put your answers in the chat box, and we want to get some answers from you to see what sort of thoughts you're having. Is already saying I'd probably look at the plans first. So yeah, have a look at maybe what was predicted. So anything else as well? So what are your other thoughts? So look at plans, which is a great start. Was typing in.
So we have some from Liz here. So Liz said, I want to know if there was a trend from previous months to compare against.
Right, that's a good one as well. Phil has said performance data by individuals, groups, regions, then interviews, line management and team members. So if we take just Phil's example here, there's data that probably would be available anyway, which is a good thing to look at. I might suggest actually look even broader than that, okay? So these are really, really good suggestions. So I'm just seeing if anyone's picked up on what they might do first.
Yeah, we have from there's quite a few coming in now. So from Bernice, I think I want to say yes. She said records checking and complaints will be the first spot to go to.
My suggestion, and this is something that nobody's come up with just yet, going on in the industry. Anybody else experience this who provides the same services or products as anybody else experience this as well? Because it may not be anything to do with what's happening internally. It may be something going on in the industry. So when you're thinking about something like this, you need the context. Okay, so this is where I said, you know, that context is everything. You need to start thinking about what's going on, and the context is broader than once you've sort of highlighted that something is going on within your organization, then you start looking at the performance data by groups, regions, and what that will give you is maybe some hotspots, the red, where are things starting to go wrong. James has also said in a service industry, I'd be looking at KPIs around input activities to diagnose where the drop in performance may have come from. So yeah, the numbers, you would definitely be using them. Emma said a reflective exercise might be nice to say what went wrong. I would definitely do that, but maybe further down the line and with fewer people. You couldn't do that necessarily, depending on how big the sales department is, because it may not just be to do with sales, it may be something else as well. So I would look at that further on, because the reflective exercise, if you're asking 3,000 people to reflect, that's an awful lot of stuff, qualitative stuff to analyse. And also data from interviews then points you in a certain direction, inside or outside of the organisation. So yeah, so don't be afraid of using your gut instinct as well. So have a look at the big data that's out there, find the hotspots, and then start to narrow in. Once you've highlighted a few areas, start to narrow down where the search is going to happen. And then things like interviews then become really, really interesting and focused, rather than interviewing everybody, because you can't possibly do that. You in a certain direction, using your gut, and then start doing the interviews. And then James has said, if you handle on inputs, outputs data, so the sales funnel, depending on the organization, so you can obviously dips in output performance before it happens. Yes, yes. So if you can see what's actually happening within your sales funnel, you might be able to spot that happening before it actually happens. So that would be a good remedy sort of for later on. But some great thoughts there. Thank you, everybody. But I'm hoping, what do you think about that, Mark?
Well, this has triggered my psychology geek, and I'm thinking about the balance between internal and external control. So with this particular example, you know, I love the idea of looking outside of the organization, but I'm always conscious with that type of, it's very easy to apportion blame to something that is entirely outside of your control.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's an industry thing. We can't influence it in any way. you can put something to a stop very easily by externalizing your locus of control, whereas actually by looking inwards and having the courage to look at what can we change, what can we influence, what can we do about
Yes,
this.
yeah.
There's definitely a balancing act there.
And I think actually in looking outside, and if there's lots of people who are suffering the same problem, but there's the odd one that isn't, that's doing really, really well, being brave enough to say, well, what are they doing that we're not doing? How can we learn from them? So that you sort of look outwards, but then remember to look inwards as well. And absolutely, it's sort of that. Yeah, we don't necessarily always want to point the finger at ourselves, but we need to have the evidence there. And this is where the numbers are really good. The numbers and also the qualitative stuff are good, because then that when you're talking to people, you can say, well, actually, I think it's a lack of resources in that department. You know, you can then go to your stakeholders and say, well, you know, these are the numbers, this is what's happening, and this is what some of our customers are saying. We've sampled, you know, a significant number of customers, and this is the data we're getting back from them. So you can use that information then to support your hypothesis of, like, if it's like lack of resources, or maybe it's a faulty product or something like that. So great points there, Mark. Thank you for that. So we are now going to move on. Thank you everyone for participating in that. We're going to look at how you find the story in the data. So we're going to look at a very simple example here. And what I'm going to do is there's going to be 4 slides that you're going to be looking at. And for every slide, what I'm going to be asking you is, what do you see? That question, what do you see? So we are starting off here, and what I've got is a very simple scoring grid for a customer service team. We've got 5 individuals, and we have got 6 different competencies which they have been scored on. So I am just going to ask you very simply, what do you see? And again, I would like you to start in the chat box. What is it that you see just looking at this table? Now, you are going to see this data different formats. You're going to see different types of graphs. Just from this one, I want you to answer that question, what do you see? I'm going to be waiting here patiently to see what people are seeing from this table. Is anything coming through in your chat box at all?
So here we have from Phil. Phil is saying all have some development areas. Some need more urgent help.
Need more urgent help. So how are you finding these people that need help? What's alerting you to the fact people need help? What's telling you that people need help? Now, some people I know, when they look at data like this, especially, I mean, this is a very small spreadsheet, so I put this data into a spreadsheet. So some people will find this, they get number blind and find it really difficult to sort through what's actually going on. But for some people, it's a lot easier, which is why we're going to use the graphs. We're not going to be using any maths at all in this. So somebody's saying that look for the higher overall performance in the areas which I think matters most as a manager. Okay, so actually this is where context comes in again, because we don't know what anybody's roles are. So we don't know if anybody is a manager, in fact. Colin's sales skills don't appear to be as good as the others. So you're absolutely right. So if you look at Colin, he scored 5, and other people have scored more highly than that. So that's a bit of a dip. Now, just going back to, so somebody else has said, oh yeah, this is a good one. So Phil has said the assumption that 5 or below is negatively affecting performance. So there are lots of assumptions that are coming in already, because, you know, saying that Colin is not performing as well, I would ask again, does Colin need to have great sales skills? I don't know what his role is. So again, context is a really, really important thing. And nobody has asked the question as yet, I don't think. Has anybody asked this question, Mark, in your chat, whether or not these scores are out of 10 or not? I mean, if you start to think that these scores might be out of 30, completely different complexion on it, doesn't it? Because actually none of them look that good then, do they?
Yeah, Phil's alluded to this. Phil said assumption that 5 or below is negatively affecting performance. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it could be the other way around. It could be, even assuming it is out of 10, 1 could be great and 10 could be in need of development.
Has actually said, and is 10 the best or worst? And
Mm.
absolutely, again, we've made that assumption. Is it 10 the best or not? The assumption is that all the data is valid, accurate, and complete, which speaks to context again, and to measure the team as a whole. So we've got 10 minutes to go, Mark, saying yes. So good, thank you, good reminder. The other thing that we haven't asked is who has scored these people? Have they scored themselves, or has their line manager scored them? So again, context is really, really important. So let me move on to the next thing. We've got a few to have a look at. And again, I'm quickly going to just ask you, what do you see? So in that table, you will have seen some stuff, but what do you see here? What does this tell you? Column or bar chart. Different data sets. Well, it's the same data set, but it's organized in a different way. So it's organized by competency so that you can see the spread and variation from each team member. So what do you see here? Anything coming through on the chat for you, Mark, then about what you can see here? Saying there's no average to measure the team as a whole. Yes, so there's no indication here what the average is, but you can sort of see the variation. You can sort of see where you've got a lot of variation. So for instance, in the far left, where it's product knowledge, you can see there's a lot of variation, you know, between the highest and the lowest. Whereas if you move to systems knowledge, there's less variation. So you're absolutely right, Emma, there's no average. So James is saying you can more easily see the competencies with greater variance. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So from this particular graph, you can see the variation in competencies. Then you have to ask yourself, is it important for all of them to be competent in absolutely every single one of them? Because we're making the assumption sometimes that everybody has to be the same, but actually, if you're looking at the balance of a team to fulfill all of those competencies, this probably doesn't tell us that. Any comments in your chat box, Mark?
Nothing that we haven't mentioned already. It's interesting, isn't it? Just a change in the perspective shifts how you're perceiving the data.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, really, really interesting. So let's move on to the next one, which is a spider diagram. Phil has already said, actually, you need to know what is critical for the customer service team. Again, we don't know what they should be scoring. Now, this is a bit of a weird one. So each of these competencies is, as it happens, it will form a hexagon. And so what you're getting is a shape for each of those individuals. So what do you see in this one here? James has said, I'm sacking Colin. Oh, bless him. You know what? If we find out he might be an absolute star, he might not need to do the things that he scored low on. So before you sack him, we need to have a little chat with his line manager to find out what's going on. But what do you see here? Right, okay. So if Colin is new, he could be amazing. Yeah, so so you can see Colin's shape here, can't you? He's almost fitting in hexagonal shape. He's actually not that bad. He's not a bad all-rounder. You can see that Tracy, he's got quite a good all-round shape as well. But actually, the thing that I see from this one is that the team sort of fills that shape quite nicely. So as a team, they sort of hit all the high scores together. So is that a good thing? I don't know, because I don't know the context. Anything else that anybody else sees in this one? What about you, Mark? What are you seeing?
Well, we do have a comment here from Bernice who said we need to understand why Sheila has some trouble working independently.
Absolutely.
Because actually, I can see. Excuse me, Bernice, for filling in what I think you're saying. It was actually, if you look at all the rest of her shape, it's just one area there where there's some room for development.
Does she need to? That's my question. Does she need to? And that's the context that we're not getting from this. So we are just looking at the numbers. We are already making assumptions, but I would suggest to you that when you get these numbers from people, you need to ask questions about, so who actually scored these people? What are the scores out of? What's high and what's low? What's acceptable? And, you know, what is acceptable for each of these people? Is it a standard score across the board? And Phil's saying they will need to rely on each other or their supervisor due to variable product knowledge or not working independently. And that might be okay. That might be okay, but it might not be. Okay. And then perhaps Sheila would get a great team player score. Yes, I think so. And actually, when you look at the next one, if we go on to the next slide, you see that Sheila always scores highly, apart from that works independently on her own initiative. And actually, she'd probably score more highly than Tracy if she was just up on that works independently. So what do you see in this particular chart? Else can see anything?
Yeah, I've come here from Liz, who said we do need to think about reliability and validity when collecting data.
Yes, and I think that's really, really important. Where is the data coming from? How valid is it? And is the data from other sources that you can use to corroborate it? So all of these numbers that we've got and we've been looking at, I would want to speak to people after this. I would want to get some qualitative stuff. So speak to the managers. Is this really the problem that's surfacing? Is Colin, do we really need to sack Colin? Because I must say I've got a soft spot for Colin. Is he new? What's happening? You know, what about Sheila? You know, how long's she been in the team? Does she need to work independently? And you may be thinking about also, how do you develop these people? And maybe some of these people would be good mentors or maybe good buddies to partner up with as well. Rough team average. Phil, I love the fact that you've actually got in there and done some maths actually. So rough team average of 35 out of 45 is 77%. Is that good enough for the team, or is there untapped potential? Fantastic. I like the fact that somebody's done some maths here, even though I said that would not necessarily have to be some maths, but it is good. Just a simple sum like that, you know, it's 35 out of 45 and that's 77%. Is that acceptable for the team? So what you do is doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't always have to be maths. And what I'm suggesting is actually just be playful in looking at your data. So I do want to see where you are on this scale now. So very, very quickly, if you can give me another score, if you are 3 or 4, or if you could, and I think Mark is handing over control to you, so I'm going to put myself fanatic range. So if you want, so Phil says he's moved from 3 to 4. Emma says she's at 6 now. Fantastic. I love that. I love how we've gone off the scale, off the Richter scale here. Brilliant. So anybody else, I'm just going to give you a few seconds to put your score in there before I move on to the next.
So Liz has said 4. I realised I know more than I thought.
Fantastic. James is a 4.5. Thank you for the optimistic new score there, James. Thank you very much for that. So a 4.5. Excellent. So I think that we've probably moved some people from where they were to where they are now. So thank you. Not 5, because always have to be careful about validity of the data and scoring. That's a really nice cautionary word from Phil there. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So brilliant webinar. Thank you so much there. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Do you need to take control or give me control?
It's over to you, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I'm moving on to the next one. What next for you? Well, if anyone has any questions, then please put them in the chat box by all means. So this is not a sales pitch, but you can buy my book called How Not to Waste Your Money on Training. There is a QR code, which somebody made a comment a while back saying, are we still using QR codes? Well, they work. So if you use your smartphone and use your camera, then what it should do is capture that QR code and take you to a web page. And so you can get more information on the book. You might want to attend something that I run. I've got a learning loop coming up on the 12th and 13th of December in Cardiff, so you can find out from the website what that's about. We've got a group called the L&D Revolution on LinkedIn, where we're having some great conversations about how we can get L&D to revolt instead of just evolve, so revolution instead of evolution. Or if you wanted to book a chat, please do that as well. Please, if you would, if you've got any questions at all, direct them to Mark or myself. Are there any questions there at all?
I haven't seen anything other than some lovely positive comments at the moment, Chris, but please do feel free to jump in and type any messages there into the box. As you are, I would just like to say an enormous thank you to Chris for sharing so much of your approach and your passion and enthusiasm for data. I'm absolutely sure some of that has rubbed off. We can probably run a survey to find out and gather some data about that, which you'll be getting that later on. As you were sharing those, feel free to mention any comments, questions, ideas as a result of what you've seen so far. I think it's also helpful to point out, just from a TMSDI practitioner point of view, there's lots of data in what we do, particularly the team management profile. And one of the things that struck me as we were going through, in particular, that sort of final section of the webinar, is just how many different interpretations of data there can be. We often and we see truth and we see objectivity, whereas depending on how we choose to look at that piece of information, and I'm thinking specifically around practical and creative as an idea, that might work as a lens through which we choose to interpret data, whether it's about the big picture trends and looking at the 5-year, 25-year picture, or whether really it's drilling right down into the cells in the spreadsheet and really looking into the detail, or maybe it's a bit of a balance of both. And of course, the profile can offer some useful cues and clues as to, as a team and individuals, how we're likely to do that.
Question from Emma. So there is some political economic uncertainty at the moment. Any tips, data tools you would use / recommend? So data tools for what? That's what I'd like to know, Emma. What is it that you're trying to do? Again, it's the context thing. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then maybe I can point you in the direction of it as well.
I mean, if I can help with that one as well in the meantime around
sure.
context, I think yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and in those environments, the messages do tend to get quite skewed and clouded, and we see that a lot, don't we, in the media? And a way of an antidote to that is to look at multiple sources.
Absolutely.
That will always help sort of level things out and look at a more rounded picture of things.
Yeah, and I think that's the tip, not necessarily the tool, because there are lots and lots of tools out there. But I think always, for me, there's a phrase called triangulation, which if you have ever done any orienteering or hill walking and map reading, basically with triangulation, if you are out somewhere and you're lost, if you find 3 things on a horizon, you can usually find out on the map where you are. And the same goes for data collection. They do recommend that you use a triangulation approach. So try 3 different data sources to confirm or refute what you're actually seeing. And an example would be, I did some work with a group of team leaders a number of years ago. And so I spent an afternoon with some senior managers to find out about these team leaders. I looked at some of their aspirational documentation, like their sales literature and induction information, but I also surveyed the team leaders themselves, and from that I got a story. It still left me with some questions, which is interesting as well, because I don't think you can ever have the complete 100% picture. You get a snapshot. I hope that helps, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions too, and the comments too. Right, so just a couple of things before we finish off then. For those of you who are accredited practitioners, a whole range of events and webinars coming up. If you've got colleagues who want to get accredited in the team management profile, we've got webinars happening this month and next month. And importantly, if you're in the UK or if you're planning on traveling to the UK for the CIPD's annual conference and exhibition in Manchester, you will find us there. We're at stand E120, and I will be giving a presentation on the Wednesday, the first day of the conference, on the future of teams. Which hopefully should be interesting and interactive, looking at what we can expect from the future of team development and team dynamics. Likewise, looking a bit further ahead, if you enjoyed today's session and want something, a whole day of discussions like this, you will love our network forum, which takes place in London on the 17th of March next year. We'll have 4 wonderful speakers exploring some of the success stories and ideas for working with our products and profiles, and we'll be gathering our international network together for that day of CPD. Please don't miss out.
And I forgot to mention, Mark, and maybe you can send it in if you're doing a follow-up email, is just for anyone who wants to buy the book, I have got a discount of 10% for everybody who it's anything to do with TMSDI, and it's TMSDI 2019 is the discount code. You get 10% off if you do want to buy the book.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. That's a great offer. And just generally, where can people find out more about you?
More about me on the website, which is www. I'll write it in the chat. www.howtoaccelerate. I'm typing this in as I'm speaking. .co.uk. How to access. I've missed out a W. This is what you get when you actually type, when you actually have a website, which is a really long name. So www.howtoacceleratelearning.co.uk. You can find out about what we do, and more about. And there's lots of free stuff on the website as well. And we have monthly subscribers, is where we send out learning development activities to people as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And then elsewhere, where else can people find out more about you?
LinkedIn and on Twitter. I do share lots of stuff on Twitter. I'm also speaking at various places, or I have been speaking at various places and doing various webinars. I'm speaking at the World of Learning, if anyone's going, on the 15th of October, talking about the 5 secrets of accelerated learning with one of our clients, Wales and West Housing, who's going to what impact the 5 secrets of accelerated learning have had on what they do, but also a very practical session. It's not a talky session, it's a very practical session. As you probably gather from this webinar, I like to get people involved as well.
We've certainly seen that. So thank you once again, Chris, and thank you for us all, for all of you for joining and interacting and sharing so generously, and really making today's session what it's been. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me as well.
Thank you, Chris.